Hi, welcome back. Now in this module we are covering obligations, the law of obligations. And today we turn to a very important part of the law that is often misunderstood and not often covered, and that has to do with tort law. Tort law plays a very important role in our society. Tort law helps to define the acceptable behavior that our society will accept. When it comes to tort law is essentially about the obligations that we owe to one another. And people don't discuss tort law much. When it does come up, it's usually in a negative sense of lawsuits that are brought without substance and runaway jury verdicts. But tort law is much more important than that. Tort law defines the duties that we all have, as well as the remedies that are available when those duties are breached. So in this lecture, we're going to learn about the law of torts, starting with intentional torts, and about how that law regulates our behavior. Now, what is a tort? A tort is a civil wrong causing loss or harm to another. It's a civil wrong because it's not a crime. A crime is a criminal wrong. A tort is a civil wrong. And the law of torts governs the duties that we owe to others, even though we've not contracted for those duties. And what tort law does is it recognizes that people have certain interests that others have the obligation or the duty to respect. And these interests, or the duties, does not depend upon promises or agreements. Instead, it simply exists because of our membership in society. And so when someone violates this duty to respect the interest, that is referred to as a tort. Now, tort law together is the body of principles that defines these interests and duties. Now, what does tort law do? Tort law performs three very important functions. First of all, it serves as compensation for the victim. Compensation for the party that has been wronged. So when you are in an auto accident where someone ran a red light and struck your vehicle, and you have suffered injuries as a result of that, both injuries to property, which is to say your car, and perhaps injuries to your body, one of the aspects of tort law is to compensate you for those injuries. Tort law is designed to put you into the same position as you would have been in had the wrongful act never been committed. Now, we can't really do that. We can't really turn back the clock to make it that the accident never happened. But what we can do is arrange for the wrongdoer, what we call the tortfeasor. The tortfeasor will pay to you compensation for your damages. And hopefully this compensation helps to make up for the harm that you have suffered. Now, another aspect of tort law is about justice. This idea that people who commit wrongs should be sanctioned by society. And so justice plays a very important role in tort law. And finally, prevention of future cost, regulation. It turns out that when a case is decided and a rule of law is set, then that rule of law becomes a rule of law that regulates everyone. And so tort law is always providing a very important regulatory function in society, meaning our obligations are not always dictated by what the Oklahoma State Legislature has said or what the Congress of the United States has said. Instead, it could well be based on what a appellate court has said. Now, tort law is primarily state common law, meaning every state has its own version of tort law. There are many similarities, but of course there are differences as well. And it is common law. The rules that we will be talking about in here for torts, that is derived from court cases. Most states have very limited statutory references to torts, meaning the elements of torts are not set out in a statute, but instead they are derived from civil cases, cases that have been previously decided. And there are elements of tort law that date back hundreds of years because they have derived from those old cases, and yet they remain relevant today in the 21st century. Statutory law is not important in the area of torts. Instead, there is a focus on the common law. The common law plays a large role in the regulation of society through tort law. The torts can be classified in different ways. There are three broad categories of torts, starting with intentional torts. Intentional torts require, as you might guess, intent. There must be a purposefulness aspect to them. They are willful acts that were intended to cause harm. Negligence is another broad category of tort, and we will be discussing negligence much more in the next lecture. And negligence does not involve intent, it's accidental harm due to the creation of an unreasonable risk or a failure to act reasonably by the tortfeasor. The third category of torts has to do with strict liability, and this involves liability regardless of intent. We generally see strict liability restricted to things like either defective products or abnormally dangerous activities, such as excavating rock by using mines or by using explosive devices. When someone is injured there, you don't have to go through the steps of proving negligence because there is strict liability even in the absence of negligence. Let's look a little bit more at intentional torts. Now, intentional torts require the defendant intend the harmful or offensive act. There must be purposefulness with it. Intentional torts are non-criminal wrongs that are committed on purpose. Intent is formed if an action is purposeful, meaning you intended to act, or knowing, meaning if you kicked at a rock in the road, you should probably be aware that kicking the rock could make it fly in the air 20 feet. So, purposeful or knowing. The test for intent focuses on whether the tortfeasor intended the act and not necessarily the result or the consequences of the act. Now, we could spend a lot of time talking about intentional torts like assault or battery or those nature, but let's talk about intentional business-related torts, starting with defamation. Defamation is a publication that injures another's character, reputation, or good name. I said that torts involve infringement on an interest belonging to a person, and every person has an interest in their character. So when a party infringes on that interest, it could be the existence of defamation. Defamation consists of a false and harmful statement about a person's reputation. Defamation can occur either through slander or libel. Slander is oral defamation. Libel is written defamation. Now, the elements for a defamation claim are that there was a defamatory statement. And again, that could be in writing or that could be in just made orally. Dissemination, meaning other people must have heard of the statement. If you are talking to an employee and you accuse that employee of being a thief, the law of torts says that person is not defamed unless someone else heard you call that person a thief, or someone else read the document in which you describe that person as a thief. So defamatory statement and dissemination, meaning someone else heard it. Specificity, it must be a direct claim. And damages, there must be some harm to your reputation in order to recover on a claim for defamation. Nevertheless, this can come up many times in employment law, that when you have a employee, you need to be careful as to what you accuse that employee of. And that could be something as broad as claiming that an employee is lazy. If you, as the manager, tell your assistant manager that a certain employee is lazy, that may rise to the level of defamation. Now, defamation does require a false statement. So the truth is always a defense to a defamation claim. That if what they are saying is true, if what the employer, for instance, has said is true, then there is no defamation claim. But of course, that becomes very difficult when establishing something like that employee is lazy. Now, another intentional tort, and this is something that really took off in the 90s and has continued through today, is trade libel or product disparagement. False statements harming a business or a product can be a tort. Some statutes were designed to enable agricultural and food corporations to prevent potential critics from criticizing the safety of their products. There was a trial held in Amarillo back in the 1990s, and this trial was notable because of the defendant. The defendant was Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey was sued by a trade organization in Texas. The trade organization had to do with beef cattle on a statement that Oprah made on her TV show that she would never eat a burger again. This was in conjunction with mad cow disease and the idea that cows were being fed other cows, perhaps who have died from mad cow disease. So Oprah makes a statement, I'm never going to eat a burger again. The beef organization then sues Oprah in federal court in Amarillo, Texas. They go through a 6-week-long trial, and eventually the court finds that Oprah's statement did not defame all beef, and so therefore Oprah Winfrey won the trial. Now, another tort that comes up in business is fraudulent misrepresentation. Usually characterized as fraud, and it occurs when a false statement of fact is used to induce another party to enter into a contract. Now, there are certain elements of this. First of all, an agreement. There must be some agreement made. False representation. The representation has to be false. The defendant must have known the representation was false, or made the statement recklessly without knowing if it was true or not. And again, dishonesty. The person who made the statement must have dishonestly made it. And then again, there must be harm. The plaintiff must have suffered measurable harm from the misrepresentation. If, for instance, you are engaged in a real estate transaction and you are buying a piece of property that you intend to use for your business, and the seller knows that the property you're buying is not zoned for commercial purposes, but tells you that it is zoned for commercial purposes, and you go through the deal and then you discover you're not able to make your business there anyway, then that is an example of fraudulent misrepresentation. Another somewhat related tort has to do with negligent misrepresentation. Negligent misrepresentation means that you made a statement that you either thought was true and was not, or you did not know whether it was true or not, but you made the statement anyway. And it requires a false statement. And it should be made in a negligent manner, meaning the defendant did not know that the statement was not true, but perhaps should have known the statement was not true. In any event, the defendant intended on the plaintiff to rely on the statement, and that reliance must be reasonable. It must be a reasonable reliance. And again, it must have caused harm, injury. The statement caused the plaintiff to suffer harm, such as economic loss. Negligent misrepresentation is not as prevalent as fraudulent misrepresentation, but the core elements are the same. It derives from a statement made that is false that leads to harm suffered by another. Another tort that arises in business, primarily in commercial retail businesses, is false imprisonment. Now, you might think of false imprisonment as being locked in a basement somewhere or being placed into jail against your illegally. But false imprisonment also arises in the civil context. Unlawful restraint of an individual occurs when the following elements are present. First of all, there must be an intentional confinement. The person who confined you must have deliberately taken actions that resulted in your detention. It must be unconsented. You must establish that you did not consent to the confinement. And the person who confined you must not have had a legal right to do so. Now, we don't need to lock someone up, but the area must somehow limit your freedom. If the area provides for a reasonable means of escape, then the area is not bounded. Now, that could simply be the wrongdoer, the tortfeasor, standing in the doorway of a room with only one door. And again, there must be harm suffered as a result. Now, where we see false imprisonment in the business-related context, it's generally involving shoplifting, that a merchant will hold someone until the police can come there. Now, there is a limited privilege available for this. However, the privilege is limited to the reasonable time it would take for a law enforcement officer to arrive and take over the prosecution of that claim. So a shopkeeper can stop a shoplifter, but only for a limited amount of time. So in conclusion, what do we learn today? The law of torts governs the duties that we owe to others. The law of intentional torts governs much of our behavior. Every intentional tort is made up of certain elements. And finally, businesses can commit intentional torts. That's all for this one. If you have any questions, please reach out. Otherwise, I will see you next time.